My stepdad always called me worthless, so I bought his house at foreclosure and handed him the eviction notice personally. Dennis moved in when I was 12, bringing nothing but a duffel bag and an attitude. Within a week, he'd claimed Dad's favorite chair and started his favorite hobby, reminding me how worthless I was. "You'll never amount to anything," became his daily greeting. When I brought home A's, he'd sneer, "Too bad grades don't pay the bills." When I got my first job at 14, he called it playing pretend at being useful. Mom defended him constantly. "He's just trying to toughen you up," she'd say, as if emotional abuse was some kind of life skill. The worst part wasn't the insults. It was watching him slowly destroy everything Dad had built. Dad's workshop became Dennis's beer storage. Family photos disappeared, replaced with Dennis's hunting trophies. Even Dad's favorite coffee mug got accidentally broken. When I turned 18, Dennis delivered his masterpiece speech. "Time to face reality," he announced during my graduation dinner. "College is for smart kids. You're barely scraping by in high school. Why don't you get a real job and start paying rent?" I looked at Mom, hoping she'd finally stand up for me. Instead, she nodded. "Dennis has a point. It's time you contributed to this household." That night, I made a decision that would define the next 12 years of my life. I moved out the next morning with my college acceptance letter hidden in my jacket. I'd been secretly working 3 jobs and saving every penny, telling them the money went to teenage stuff. While Dennis called me worthless, I'd been building my escape plan. College wasn't easy. I worked overnight shifts at a diner, cleaned offices on weekends, and tutored struggling students. My roommates partied while I lived on ramen and studied in library corners. But every time exhaustion hit, I'd remember Dennis's voice calling me worthless. That memory became my fuel. After graduation, I took a job at a small investment firm. While my colleagues bought expensive cars and designer clothes, I lived in a studio apartment and drove a 15-year-old Honda. Every spare dollar went into investments and real estate courses. Dennis, meanwhile, was living his best life. Mom's Instagram showed their vacation photos from Vegas, their new boat, their weekend trips to wine country. He'd convinced her to refinance Dad's house, the house Dad had paid off completely, to fund their lifestyle. I started getting alerts about late mortgage payments on the property when I was 26. By then, I owned 4 rental properties and had built a small real estate empire. I watched from a distance as they missed payment after payment. When the foreclosure notice was filed, I was ready. I submitted my bid through a shell company, offering just enough above the minimum to secure the purchase. The irony was perfect. I bought my childhood home for 60 cents on the dollar with the money I'd saved while Dennis called me worthless. The day I signed the papers, I drove to what was now my property. Dennis's truck sat in the driveway next to Mom's car. I took a deep breath, grabbed the eviction notice from my passenger seat, and walked to the front door. I knocked once. Dennis answered in his usual stained t-shirt, beer in hand. His face went through several emotions as he recognized me: surprise, confusion, then his typical sneer. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," he said. "Come crawling back to Mommy?" "Actually," I said, holding up the eviction notice, "I came to deliver this. You have 30 days to vacate my property." His face went white as he read the paper. Behind him, I could hear Mom asking who was at the door. "This is impossible," he whispered. "There's no way you could afford—" "Funny thing about being worthless," I interrupted. "It motivated me to prove you wrong." Mom appeared behind him, her face confused as she took in the scene. "What's going on?" she asked. Dennis couldn't form words. I stepped forward, my voice steady and clear. "I bought the house, Mom. This is your official eviction notice." The color drained from her face as the realization hit. But what happened next changed everything. Instead of apologizing or begging, Dennis's face twisted with pure rage. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think you're clever. You have no idea what you've just started." Something in his eyes made my stomach drop. This wasn't over, not even close. Dennis slammed the door so hard the frame shook. Through the thin walls of Dad's old house, I could hear him screaming. At Mom, at the situation, at me. Glass shattered. Something heavy hit the wall. Mom's voice rose in panic, trying to calm him down. I stood on the porch for a moment, wondering if I should call the police. But Mom had made her choice years ago. She'd chosen Dennis over her own child, chosen his version of reality over truth. If she wanted out, she knew my number. Walking back to my car, I felt a mix of satisfaction and unease. The satisfaction was obvious. 12 years of planning had led to this moment. But the unease lingered. Dennis wasn't the type to go quietly. He was going to fight this, and he played dirty. I was right. The next morning, my phone rang at 6 a.m. It was Mom, sobbing. "You have to undo this," she begged. "Dennis says you're trying to make us homeless. We don't have anywhere to go." "You have 30 days, I said calmly. "That's more notice than most tenants get. This house has been our home for 15 years. My father never wanted Dennis living here." I cut her off. "And you know it." She sobbed harder. "Please, I'm begging you. He's talking about doing something terrible if we lose the house." "What kind of terrible?" "I can't say, but you know how he gets when he's angry." I did know. I'd lived with his anger for 6 years before escaping. But I also knew something else. Dennis was a coward. His threats were usually empty, designed to control through fear. "Mom, if he's threatening you, you can come stay at my place. But Dennis isn't welcome. I can't leave him. You don't understand?" "I understand perfectly. You chose him over me a long time ago. Now live with that choice." I hung up. The harassment started that afternoon. First, it was phone calls. Dozens of them from different numbers. Dennis had apparently recruited his drinking buddies to bombard me with threats and insults. When I blocked those numbers, new ones appeared. Then came the emails. Dennis had somehow gotten my work address and was sending increasingly unhinged messages about how I'd stolen his home and ruined his life. He carbon copied my boss, my colleagues, even my building's management company. By day 3, I had to involve my lawyer. "This is clear harassment," she said, reviewing the evidence I'd compiled. "We can get a restraining order, but that might escalate things." "What do you mean?" "Men like Dennis don't respond well to legal boundaries. Sometimes it makes them more dangerous." She was right. The restraining order seemed to break something in Dennis's brain. Within hours of being served, he showed up at my office building. Security called me from the lobby. "There's a man down here demanding to see you. He's agitated. Says he's your father." "He's not my father. Call the police." By the time I got downstairs, they had Dennis in handcuffs. He was screaming about property theft and ungrateful children, while security footage captured everything. The police officer taking his statement looked exhausted. "This is going to be a simple case," the officer told me afterward. "Violation of a restraining order is a misdemeanor, but given the pattern of harassment, he'll probably spend a few days in jail." I nodded, but something in my gut said this wasn't over. Dennis was released 3 days later. That night, someone threw a brick through my apartment window. No cameras caught it, no witnesses came forward, but I knew. The next week, my car tires were slashed. Then my office mailbox was filled with dead fish. Each incident was small enough to avoid serious police attention, but clear enough to send a message. Dennis wasn't backing down. My lawyer suggested hiring private security, but I had a different idea. I called my college roommate, Priscilla, who now worked in cybersecurity. "I need a favor," I told her, "and it's not exactly legal." "What kind of not legal?" "The kind where I need to know everything about someone's digital life." She was quiet for a moment. "This is about your stepdad situation? He's escalating. I need leverage. Send me his information. But if this goes sideways, we never had this conversation." 3 days later, Priscilla sent me an encrypted file that made my jaw drop. Dennis wasn't just an abusive stepfather. He was a criminal. The file contained evidence of tax evasion, unemployment fraud, and something much worse. He'd been stealing from the construction company where he worked as a foreman. For 5 years, Dennis had been skimming money from job sites, inflating material costs, and pocketing the difference. The company was family-owned, run by an elderly man who trusted his employees. Dennis had stolen over $200,000. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was why he needed the money. Dennis had a gambling addiction that made Mom's shopping habit look restrained. Online poker, sports betting, casino trips. He'd been burning through money so fast that even his thefts couldn't keep up. The house refinancing hadn't been about lifestyle upgrades. It had been about covering gambling debts to some very dangerous people. Now I understood why he was so desperate to keep the house. He'd been using it as collateral for loans that would break his legs if he defaulted. The 20-day mark came and went with no moving preparations. I wasn't surprised. Dennis was the type to push every deadline, hoping for a miracle or planning something dramatic. On day 25, I got a call from the fire department. "Is this the owner of 412 Maple Street?" My stomach dropped. "Yes, there's been an incident. You need to come down here immediately." I drove to the house expecting to find it burned down. Instead, I found something worse. Dennis had tried to make it look like I'd committed arson for insurance money. He'd started a small fire in Dad's old workshop, then called it in anonymously, claiming he'd seen me fleeing the scene. The only problem with his plan was that I'd been at work during the alleged arson time, with dozens of witnesses and security footage to prove it. When the fire investigator found accelerant splashed around the workshop and Dennis's fingerprints on the gas can, the story unraveled quickly. "He's looking at felony arson and filing a false police report," the investigator told me, "plus whatever else you want to throw at him for the harassment." Standing in Dad's damaged workshop, I made a decision. It was time to end this. I called Dennis's construction company and requested a meeting with the owner, Brixton Fletcher. He was in his 70s, a soft-spoken man who'd built his business on reputation and handshake deals. "I have information about one of your employees," I told him. "It's serious." When I laid out the evidence of Dennis's thefts, Fletcher's face went ashen. He'd suspected something was wrong. Costs had been higher than usual, tools had gone missing, but he'd never imagined the scope of the betrayal. 5 years, he whispered, looking at the documents. "He's been stealing from me for 5 years. I'm sorry to be the one to tell you." Fletcher shook his head. "Don't be sorry. You're doing the right thing. How did you get this information? Does it matter?" He studied my face for a moment, then smiled sadly. "No, I suppose it doesn't. What do you want me to do with this?" "Whatever you think is appropriate. I just thought you deserved to know." 3 hours later, Dennis was fired and escorted off the job site by security. Fletcher had also called the police to report the thefts. By evening, Dennis was back in jail, this time for felony embezzlement. The next morning, Mom called. "You destroyed his life," she sobbed. "The police came and arrested him at work. Everyone saw. He'll never get another job in construction. He destroyed his own life. I just made sure there were consequences. You don't understand. The people he owes money to, they're dangerous. Without his job, he can't pay them back. They're going to hurt him. Maybe he should have thought about that before he started stealing and gambling." "Please," she begged. "Can't you just forgive him? Let him come back to the house? He'll change, I promise." I almost laughed. After everything, the years of abuse, the harassment, the arson attempt, she still wanted to protect him. Mom, the house is being renovated. You both need to be out by tomorrow, or I'll have the sheriff remove you. Where are we supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore. I hung up and immediately called a moving company that specialized in rapid cleanouts. By noon the next day, everything Dennis and Mom owned was sitting on the curb in boxes and garbage bags. The locks were changed, security cameras were installed, and a cleaning crew was scrubbing away 15 years of their presence. Standing in the empty house, I could finally see it the way Dad had intended. Without Dennis's clutter and modifications, the bones of the house were beautiful. Dad's craftsmanship was evident in every corner. The built-in bookshelves, the crown molding, the hardwood floors he'd refinished by hand. I spent the next 3 months restoring the house to Dad's vision. The workshop became a workshop again. The family photos went back on the walls. Even Dad's coffee mug, which I'd rescued from a thrift store years earlier, returned to its place in the kitchen cabinet. Dennis, meanwhile, was facing serious legal problems. The embezzlement charges carried a potential 10-year prison sentence. His gambling debts had caught up with him, and according to courthouse gossip, he was cooperating with law enforcement to reduce his sentence by providing information about the loan sharks who'd been bankrolling his addiction. Mom moved in with her sister across town. She stopped calling after I made it clear that Dennis wasn't welcome in my life under any circumstances. Sometimes I felt guilty about the finality of it, but then I'd remember the years of worthless, and the guilt would evaporate. 6 months after the eviction, I was putting the finishing touches on Dad's workshop when someone knocked on the front door. Through the security camera, I could see a woman in her 50s with graying hair and tired eyes. I opened the door cautiously. "Are you the one who bought this house?" "Yes, can I help you?" She smiled sadly. "I'm Patricia Fletcher, Brixton Fletcher's daughter, the man who owned the construction company where Dennis worked." My stomach tightened. "Is everything okay?" "My father wanted to thank you personally, but he's not well enough to travel. May I come in?" I led her to the living room, offering coffee and trying to read her expression. "Your information about Dennis saved our family business," she said. "We almost went bankrupt because of his thefts." Dad was starting to think he was losing his mind, that maybe he'd mismanaged the money himself. "I'm glad I could help, but that's not why I'm here." She reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. "Dad wanted to give you this." Inside was a check for $50,000. "I can't accept this," I said immediately. "It's not charity. It's a reward. Dennis stole $200,000 from us over 5 years. Because of your information, we were able to recover most of it through insurance and his cooperation with the police. Dad insisted you deserved something for your honesty." I stared at the check, overwhelmed. This is too much. Dad also wanted me to tell you something. He said men like Dennis spend their whole lives tearing other people down because they're terrified of their own inadequacy. But people like you build things up, you create value, you make the world better. After she left, I sat in Dad's chair, now my chair, and thought about the journey that had brought me here. 12 years ago, Dennis had called me worthless and kicked me out of this house. Now I owned it, had rebuilt it, and was sitting in it as a successful adult with a career, properties, and a future. The irony was perfect. But the real satisfaction wasn't in the revenge or the money or even the house. It was in proving to myself that Dennis had been wrong. I wasn't worthless. I never had been. 3 months later, Dennis was sentenced to 4 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2. At the sentencing hearing, the judge noted that his cooperation with authorities had helped dismantle a loan sharking operation that had been preying on desperate people for years. Mom was there, sitting in the back row, looking older and more fragile than I remembered. When Dennis was led away in handcuffs, she finally understood that this wasn't temporary. This wasn't something she could fix with tears or manipulation. This was consequences. As I left the courthouse, she approached me in the parking lot. "I know you hate me," she said quietly. "I don't hate you, Mom. I just don't trust you. Could we maybe have coffee sometime? Just to talk?" I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or agenda. All I saw was exhaustion and regret. "Maybe," I said, "but Dennis can never be part of my life. Ever. If you're still choosing him over me, then we have nothing to talk about." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I understand." We did have coffee. Once a month, at a neutral location, we'd sit across from each other and try to rebuild something resembling a relationship. It was awkward and careful, but it was progress. During one of our meetings, she told me something that surprised me. "I knew he was gambling," she admitted. "I knew about the money problems, the loans, all of it. I was just too scared to leave." Scared of what? Of being alone. Of admitting I'd wasted 15 years on someone who wasn't worth it. Of facing what I'd done to you. "What did you do to me?" She looked at me with raw honesty for the first time in years. "I let him treat you like garbage because it was easier than fighting him. I chose a man over my own child because I was selfish and weak. I failed you as a mother." It was the apology I'd been waiting for my entire adult life. Not an excuse or a justification, but a real acknowledgement of what had happened. "Thank you for saying that," I told her. "We're still working on our relationship. It's complicated and probably always will be, but at least now it's honest." As for Dennis, he writes letters from prison sometimes. They sit unopened in a box in my office, along with all the other debris from that chapter of my life. I don't read them because there's nothing he could say that would matter to me anymore. He called me worthless, so I became worth something. He tried to destroy me, so I built myself up stronger. He thought he could control me through fear and intimidation, so I learned to fight back with intelligence and patience. In the end, the best revenge wasn't buying his house or getting him arrested or even watching him lose everything. The best revenge was becoming the person he said I could never be. Every morning I wake up in Dad's house, my house, and remember that Dennis was wrong about everything. I'm not worthless. I never was. And that's a lesson that was worth every difficult year it took to learn. On the anniversary of buying the house, I threw a party. Not to celebrate revenge, but to celebrate the life I'd built despite everything Dennis had tried to do to stop me. Friends came over, we grilled burgers in the backyard, and for the first time in years, the house was filled with laughter and joy. Priscilla pulled me aside during the party. "You know what's crazy?" she said. "Dennis actually did you a favor. How do you figure? He gave you something to prove wrong. Without his voice in your head telling you that you couldn't succeed, would you have worked as hard? Would you have been as driven?" I thought about it. Would I have lived in that studio apartment for 5 years if I hadn't been determined to prove Dennis wrong? Would I have worked 3 jobs through college? Would I have saved every penny instead of living like my peers? Maybe not, I admitted. So in a weird way, his abuse made you stronger. That doesn't make the abuse okay. Of course not, but it makes your success even more impressive. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the front porch and looked at the house I'd rebuilt. Dad would have been proud, I thought, not just of the house, but of the person I'd become. Dennis had called me worthless, and I'd spent 12 years proving him wrong. But now, finally, I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. I knew who I was and what I was capable of. The kid who'd been kicked out with nothing but a duffel bag and a college acceptance letter had grown into an adult who owned property, ran a successful business, and had built a life worth living. That's not worthless. That's everything. 5 years have passed since I bought the house. Dennis got out of prison last year and moved 2 states away. Mom occasionally mentions him in our monthly coffee meetings, but she's learned not to push for reconciliation. She's also learned not to defend his actions or make excuses for the past. The house has become something Dad never could have imagined. The centerpiece of a small real estate empire that now includes 12 properties across 3 counties. I kept Dad's workshop exactly as he'd designed it, but added a home office where I manage my investments and plan my next acquisitions. Sometimes I think about the kid I was at 18, standing in this living room while Dennis told me I'd never amount to anything. If I could go back and tell that kid what the future held, would they believe me? Probably not. But that kid didn't need to know the future. They just needed to keep going, one day at a time, one small victory after another. Dennis called me worthless, so I became worthy. He tried to break me, so I built myself stronger. He wanted to control my story, so I took control and wrote my own ending. And what an ending it turned out to be.